Okay, let's now talk about solving modeling problems and how to exactly use which technique and when to use it and how to really help yourself while you are modeling. Here in this scene you can see 4 polygons. They are all quads. So if you, for example, take a look at this one, let's go into our edge mode, it has 4 sides. It's nice and neat quad polygon. Right next to it is a kind of a rhomb polygon, and it also has 4 sides. It's a quad. This one, like say some diamond shape, it's also is a 4-sided polygon. So don't let the appearance of the polygon confuse you. It is important for the polygon to have 4 sides. And we will talk about this too a bit more, when and how you can use it. And this one, as we saw in previous video, it's a degenerated polygon. Okay, well, not quite a bit, because these 2 edges do not lie on the same plane. Okay, I strongly advise you to use only these 2 types if you can. If you have to use occasionally these 2 types of polygons, try your best to keep this surface, this surface to be as flat as it can. It will help you a lot. Okay, let's tackle our first modeling problem. Now as we see, we can utilize various shapes that are actually quad polygons. Okay, now we have a simple plane here. Let's say we are doing our subdivision modeling, so I will press my Alt key and create these hypernerves as a parent of this plane. So we just here under display menu turn these isoparms on, so we could actually see only this original geometry. So that additional geometry made by this hypernerves object doesn't distract us. Okay, so basically users have the first modeling problem you will most surely tackle is creating a hole. So let's say you want a hole right here. It'd be rather simple. Just simply select this polygon and delete it, and you have a hole. Okay, really looks nice. But what if you are modeling without hypernerves? Okay, just take it out and delete this hypernerves. What if you need a rounded hole, but you are using only simple modeling without subdivision? What then? Well, firstly, what you will have to do is to add more detail to this place where you want to add a hole. Okay, so let's go to our modeling layout. First we will patch this hole up. Okay, let's close the hole. Now we will activate our knife tool, K key, and see this, we want a loop mode here. It will basically cut all the way through geometry. So let's create additional cuts here. Let's say here. Also on the vertical side, you can make, for example, cuts here and let's say here. Okay, so you can see if I activate my move tool, now we have quite a lot of geometry here, and we cut this all the way just to keep us from creating n-gons. Okay, so let's select all these faces with our live selection tool and delete them. And now we have a hole, but the problem, the hole is not rounded and nice. And we will solve it by going to our edge mode, and we will select this loop of polygons. Okay, you can press U, L, and you see now this loop tool behaves on this geometry that is closed, that has some surface between it. If you want to actually select this loop, this boundary loop, we will naturally check this boundary loop option. Okay? Once we selected this loop, we will activate our extrude tool with letter D. And what I want you to do now is to do a zero extrusion on this edge. So it will basically create a copy of that edge. Okay, so I'll type in 0 here and press apply, and it will seem like nothing has happened, but actually there are two exactly the same loops of edges here. Okay, so now go here, and what you want to do now is you want to collapse all that edges in a single point. So again, we're going to go to our move tool simply because we don't want to make accidental mistakes or some new extrusions. Okay, and you will see here under functions menu there is a collapse option, or the shortcut U and C. We'll utilize that U and C. Basically now all that extruded edges collapsed into a single point here. Okay, so let's go to our point mode now, and since this is a single point, every operation that we'll do on that point, especially bevel operations, will expand the same amount in every direction. So what that means, if I activate my bevel tool, if I bevel this point now, I will get a hole that is somewhat rounded. Okay, so what I now want to do is possibly, let's say I want to select this loop. I will turn off this boundary loop since we don't have any boundary loops again, and let me now just fill this inside selection with my UF shortcut key and simply delete that. Okay, now there are many ways to fix this hole. By fixing I mean repairing the shape to be more rounded. Okay, so you can, for example, select this loop of edges here, again, boundary loop on. We have to be in edge mode. So there is a option in the brush tool that says smooth. So let's smooth this a bit. Okay, you see, now it's always good to remember that Cinema 4D smooths only, or does the operation only on the selected and active objects and components. Okay, so you can now basically do what you want with that hole. You can scale it, and you have a nice and clean hole without hypernerves. Okay, let's go to our next example. In this example, we will also solve some common modeling problems. For example, adding thickness to an object. So you currently see this donut-shaped surface is really flat. It doesn't have any thickness. There are a few ways inside Cinema 4D to add thickness, but probably the most commonly used is the adding thickness with the extrude tool. Okay, so to actually add thickness to this object, we will select all these faces with Ctrl A and activate our extrude tool with our D key. Now, if you extrude this, we will gain some thickness here, but if you look underneath, the object is hollow. So if you check this create caps option, it will fill that surface and the object will be closed and thick. Okay, one word of caution though, this create caps option can create problems. It can create caps, but it can also create problems. So for example, if you are modeling and you're extruding from a non-hollow or a flat shape. Let me demonstrate it. I will extrude this again. Now you made a problem. You got yourself into trouble without even knowing it. Why? Well, let's demonstrate it. Let's put this object under hypernerves. Okay, so if we zoom in a bit, let me check this eyes of arms no, so we won't see that additional geometry. You see this? Those are double edges. There are double information. There are edges and surfaces hidden in enclosed geometry, and that's bad. Let me delete this. So if I select few of these faces with my live selection tool and simply delete them, you'll see here in the inside of the object the extrude tool created caps, and that's bad. Those caps should not be existent. Okay, the let's say the geeky technical rule or explanation or law should be don't have more than two faces sharing a common edge. That means a single edge. You see here those two faces share this edge. Let me go to edge mode, and this one is additional, and it's also in enclosed geometry. That is very bad. Don't do that. Okay, let's see our next example. Okay, so we can zoom out a bit, and we will delete this object since we don't longer need it. Okay, simply delete it. Now as you can see, there is absolutely nothing in our viewport, but as you can see in Object Manager, there are two objects. And the reason why you can see them, because this parent object has red dot here. That means I'm invisible in viewport. So child always inherits the behaviors and settings of the parent. Okay? You can override that by forcing with this green dot here. So it will be seen in viewport regardless of the parent setting. Okay? You can even drag your mouse while playing with those dots, and you will see that you can actually create multiple settings in one stroke. Okay? It's really neat. Experiment with that. Okay, back to our problems. Well, the problem here and the problem you will most certainly encounter is how do I connect two different pieces of geometry? Well, since those two are interpreted by Cinema like objects for themselves, you have to connect them first. Okay, so we will select them here, and under objects we will go connect plus delete. Well, why not connect? It sounds really logical. Well, simply because if I click connect, then the original objects will stay along with the new object that is formed from those two. And I don't want that. I really want to create a single new object. So let's undo that and go objects, connect plus delete, and now we have a single object. Okay? I don't even need this cube's null object anymore, so I will simply drag our new object and delete this null. Let me rename it to something really original like cubes. Okay, so you probably will want to make a connection, a new geometry between two objects, and there is a nice tool for it in Cinema 4D, and it's called the bridge tool. So to demonstrate that bridge tool, well, let's simply select these two polygons. You see now that that's a single object, and just extrude inner this to have a nicer view. It will be easier for you to understand the tool. So now if you select this little guy here or press the letter B on your keyboard, so B for bridge, you'll be able just to left click and simply you will see this preview line. So it means that this vertex, this point, this will be welded to which point? This one, this one, this one. this seems the most logical. Okay, and instantly you will have new geometry between those faces. Okay, this bridge tool works in also in edge mode, okay, and in point mode. Okay, experiment with it. So that's another little problem to solve. Let me undo that. My move tool. So let's say another really common problem for beginner, even experienced modelers, is how to create arcs between objects. Well, for some simpler stuff, you will simply select those two polygons, hit D for extrusion, extrude them. You see, I made a mistake. I left my create caps on. So I will extrude it. I will undo that once more. Okay, so I will uncheck these create caps. Okay, I will simply press reset values to get everything back to default values. Once again, I will select my other face, and now I will do the extrusion. Okay, everybody makes mistakes. Okay, so let's de-extrude that. And now, as in previous video, we can simply select those two faces and simply bridge them. Okay, so many of you are saying, okay, that's not an arc, that's a blocky, ugly, sharp something. Well, to create an arc, you could go to your edge mode and simply bevel these edges. For example, if I do my reset values here, then I can change this, for example, to a convex mode and add some subdivision. Now, this is basically good enough for some situations. But let me show in my next example how to create some really good arcings. Okay. So let's see if I can undo all this to default state that I had those two cubes. So let me undo once, twice, three, and okay. So you can set multiple undo levels in preferences. So you can have, let's say, 100 undo levels. Okay, back to our arcing problem. Sometimes you will need some good, really nice defined shapes between two objects. So let me just reset values here. We will also select, but this time a single face. So we want to define an arc. And you can, if you remember, we used a matrix extrude tool. Here, if I reset values and hit apply, I will get something like this in the default state, which is not really what I want. So let's fiddle around a bit with the settings. I think this step count is too much, and you can see that this extrusion scales down proportionally with every step, and I don't want that. I want this extrusion to be always the same. I don't want these polygons to scale down, so I will enter 100 here to retain 100% of original scale. Okay, and here also. Okay, here under rotation, I will rather enter 0. Why? Well, simply it's because on the wrong axis. Here is the right axis, and you see that's quite too much. So I can probably live with something that is around 15. Okay, and I think this step of extrusion is too much, so I will simply decrease that to 6. Okay, and I think it looks quite good. Okay, so we will select our move tool and our other face and simply do the apply action because every setting in the tool has state. Okay, and now you have two same extrusions. The only thing you have to change on this one is the rotation. You want this to go in a quite opposite way, so this value has to be exact also opposite, so minus 15 degrees. Okay, and now you can simply select those two faces and simply bridge the gap with our bridge tool. Okay, and you have a quite a decent arc there. Of course, you can manually always correct something. For example, you see this is not quite straight, so you can select those two faces and zero them out here on the x axis. Size should be 0, so they are flattened out. Okay, you can do this on this side also. 0, enter, and that's an example of simple arcing. Okay, to go even a step further, you can, for example, activate your knife tool and add a loop cut here. I'm just pressing my shift key so I have a preview, so I can exactly position this to 50%, which is exactly half, and oops, we do that again. You see, those simple mistakes are just a part of the modeling process. Okay, aha, there you go. This is currently selected and the cut won't work because the restrict to selection is enabled. I can correct that with deselecting all, and simply I will again shift lock my cut and enter here 50% and click, and there I have my cut. One nice feature is if you are cutting something, for example, let me undo that. If you are in the edge mode and you make a cut, again 50%, I like those correct numbers. Now if you have this select cuts enabled, that means that newly formed cut will be selected, which is really useful because now if I activate my move tool, I can simply just move this arc a bit. Okay, just to create a simple round. Let's go to our next example. Okay, so let me delete this object right now. Let's create, for example, cylinder. But let's say, see, I have to enable this wireframe mode, so I will exactly see how much geometry do I have. Okay, so let's say 10 segments, rotational segments. Okay, and let me convert it by pressing C and create additional copy of it, and I will just pull it upwards. Okay, so say you're modeling something, for example, and you have deleted all these faces. With, for example, you can utilize the loop tool, so UL, and you deleted these faces, and also on this cylinder. And now, what if you want to connect those two objects? Well, as we saw, we can do a connect plus delete and we get a single object. But now, since we don't want to have surfaces in between our connections, which would mean problems. Why? Because we would have free surfaces, free faces sharing common edge, and that would show artifacts in random, just as I showed you in that disk or donut example. So here is a big problem. We want to connect these pieces of geometry, but if we're going to do it, let's say manually, it could work for this simple presentation. But what if you have so many points? Or that would be clumsy, that would be inefficient. So let me undo that all. That would be really, really time consuming, and you will be really, really spending a lot of time on modeling, which is not really good idea. Okay, you want rather to spend that time on artistic side, not a technical side. Okay, for this purpose we can utilize a stitch and sew tool. So we'll basically select loops of these edges. So we're going to go to UL, and you see you can select boundary loops. Okay, and now you will activate your stitch and sew tool and simply connect the logical points. And now you instantly connected your geometry. Okay, but what if you have this situation? You have to create additional geometry here, but without destroying these edges, because we, in the previous example, I connected this edge to this one and we lost that edge as information. What if we want to create additional geometry here, so we can, for example, extrude another shape in this direction? So how do we do that? Well, we will once again use the almighty extrude tool. So shortcut D, and again we want a 0 extrusion. Okay, so we hit apply, and now we have again a loop of edges, additional loop of edges in the same place. So now if we select our stitch and sew tool, which is MP keyboard shortcut, we can do the same operation, and now we have an additional geometry. So this can be useful if you want, for example, to do some operation on newly created geometry on the intersection. Maybe you wanted to extrude this. Okay, and you will see a much more useful feature later. Okay, so remember this, these are little tips and tricks, and they can help you a lot in your workflow. Okay, that leads me next directly to our next problem. So I'll create a new scene for that problem and be right back in a second. In this example, we have a little bit of a different situation. We also have one geometry, and that geometry is not connected, and we would like it to be connected. So, as I said earlier, you can connect only if the geometry has the equal amount of points. So instead manually counting these points, which is wrong, we will utilize a nice nifty tool inside Cinema4D that can be found here under Window, Selection, Structure, Info. Okay, so let's go into our edge mode and see, or rather point mode, to see what is the point count on these geometries. So I will select my U and L shortcut key that activates the loop selection. So for example, I go here on the Selection, Structure, Info. So I can see here that this cylinder has 30 points. You can of course also see some additional information about your geometry. And yeah, I will just slightly rotate this. If I select this side, then I see this cylinder has 31 points. And that means next. There is no way you can connect these two geometries if the point count isn't correct. It's simply not possible. What you almost always want to do is to reduced number of points. But let's see, a solution one would be, and you're probably right too, let's say select our knife tool and add that additional geometry. So let's add a knife cut, let's say here, and oh, we see we have an angle, so let's continue and add a cut here. So imagine now when you have an exact number of points, it's rather easy to connect. But what if this geometry doesn't end here and it goes God knows where, and it's a part of a really complex object? Adding that much geometry would completely destroy the topology or the edge flow or what we are trying to achieve. So we have to create a way to connect these two geometries without adding loops. Okay, so let me undo that. And now the best solution here is to really remove one of these points. But if we remove one of these points, we will again deal with angles, and we have to cheat a bit. We have to create an intermediate quad. So here on this side, we'll activate our slide tool and we'll slide this point with Control key, holding down, and it will weld with this next point. We'll also do that on this side. Why? You will see. So now I have effectively created two triangles in between, which is a very bad thing. But the boundaries of the geometry will function just fine. So if you have some geometry going away from these edges, and this is not the end, so it wouldn't matter, it would not destroy the flow of the geometry that is imaginary attached to this one. Okay, so if I now go into my edge mode and simply delete this edge, oops, I don't want to delete it, I want to melt it with UZ. See, again, mistakes are just part of the job. Now, although as it looks like a triangle, it's not, it's an odd polygon. So let's slide this point just a bit to obey that rule that points or edges should not lie on the same plane. So now we effectively have, let us see, with our selection structure info, we now in loop mode, we have, do that again, we have 30 points on this side and 30 points on this side. Okay, and we will talk about solving triangles and geometry stuff right here in this example. So now, as we saw in previous video, we can simply select those two loops and let's say stitch them together in some logical place, let's say here maybe. Okay, what you want to be careful is probably most always good idea is to zero extrude those edges and connect them then with the stitch and sew tool. Okay, example here, you can always do the undo as many times you want. Of course, you can also, example, select this loop here, just rotate it slightly so it fits the natural flow a bit more. Okay, although this can be used to solve your problems, it's always better to plan ahead, to really think how much geometry will have. And users generally ask which amount of geometry when I want to model something is enough. When do I know that I have too much geometry or too little geometry? Well, the answer is use the minimum, the absolutely minimum amount of geometry that makes your objects look believable. It's a matter of seconds to manipulate and add more detail and additional loops, but once you add too many details, your mesh or your model would become practically impossible to work on. So imagine you would rather want to work on something like this, or maybe even a smaller amount of geometry than, let's say, we just subdivide with number of 2, then this would be a really problematic to work with it. And we saw one problem solved. So we have the problem, we have a different amount of points on our geometries, we wanted to connect them, and we utilize some cheating in a form of this, let's say, diamond looking quad polygon. Always check under hypernerves how does that polygon look when you subdivide it. If it has no artifacts, then just fine, you can leave it. If not, if there are artifacts, just simply manipulate slightly with slide and possibly move tool, just to have a nice and neat surface. Okay, let's go to our next example. In this example we will talk about stepping. By stepping I mean stepping up or down in number of geometry. As you can see now, we have on this side 2 loops of faces, and here we have 4 loops of faces. So basically this is a doubled geometry than this. So if we actually want to connect these 2 objects, well, first what pops to mind is to select knife tool, and in loop mode we will just create simple cuts. Let's sort of eyeball it, and with our bridge tool, say B, keyboard shortcut, we will simply connect those 2 together. Okay, that is a solution, and it works on some simpler stuff. So let me undo that. Yes, for 4 times undo. And additional tool that can be used is also you can press U and B. You will select this ring of polygons. So under structure menu you can do a connect command, and this will create a edge directly in the middle of those polygons. So you will probably have a nice equally length edges to connect with. Okay, so just a small addition. So let me deselect all. The problem here would be, what if you say select your knife tool, line mode, and you can't simply add edges or points here because you modeled something and it's just exactly right, and you will destroy the topology or the looks of the model, whatever. So if you add an edge, you will have an angle which is really bad. So how can we solve this without affecting this geometry or without destroying this geometry? Okay, well, basically, let me undo that. What you want to do here is again create triangles. How? Let me show how. So you have to terminate the connection here with, so the only thing that will change is on this area right here. So this area starting from these 2 faces should not be affected. Okay, so let me terminate this on this edge and again on this one. So again, move tool, I created 2 triangles. Now we have equal amount of information. We have 4 edges from each side, and we can pretty much connect them as we want. Okay, let us do that. Okay, we'll select our bridge tool so we can connect these faces. Okay, so now if I, let's say for example, select this edge and hit a melt command, so U Z keyboard shortcut, I again have a quad. It's a degenerated one since those points lie on the same plane. So I simply, with my slide tool in point mode, simply slide this point a bit. Okay, so we again have a consistency in mesh. We don't have angles, we have all quads. And let's say the practical use of this will be when you will be connecting parts you modeled separately. For example, you modeled a head that has one density of geometry, and you, let's say, modeled an ear that has a much more geometry in general. Also, another example would be you modeled a forearm, and then you want to connect the hand, which generally always has more information on. Okay, it's just a simple tricky trick. Okay, let's see our next example. You can also do this the other way, but you will be scaling down information from this side rather than adding information on this side. And you will probably know which is the best method for you. It's all dependent on the model. Okay, this is just an example. So what we want to do here is simply we want to slide these points with Control key, press down, so it will weld to the nearest point we slide. Okay, let's weld this one too. Now we will simply, in our edge mode, we can cycle those modes as I mentioned earlier with Enter key, and simply melt this edge down. Obey some basic rules, and we simply slide this a bit inward. Okay, so now we have two edges to connect. One thing I want to mention is here under Window, here under Layout, there is a Command Manager, and you can assign any shortcut you want for a specific tool. So that is really useful if you're coming from another application and you are used to some keyboard shortcuts. Okay, it was just a little digression from modeling. Okay, let's see our next example. In this example, I want to show you how to make rounded extrusions and how, for example, to extrude a cylindrical shape from a flat surface or even though from any surface. Okay, this question popped up on the forum, and that forum is c4dcafe.com, run by Nigel, which is really great forum, and I advise you to become a member and fire away with questions. And there are very helpful and also very skillful members down there. So once again, c4dcafe.com. Okay, back to our modeling problems. So in one of previous lessons we saw how to create a hole. So let me just select a loop of this loop of edges and simply with my U and F shortcut fill this selection and delete it. Now I can simply, with my D key, I can zero extrude this edge and simply use another shortcut, which is U and C, to collapse that all to this middle point. Okay, so now if I cycle to my point mode, select this point here, we disable this soft selection. Okay, if I now go here under my bevel tool and create a bevel to get a cylindrical circular shape. Okay, one thing that you have to bear in mind, to get really precise circles, you have to have a lot of geometry. Okay, are really a lot. I mean, like many points that will define this circle. So always plan that. Plan if your object is going to be really close, then you will have to have a lot more geometry if you want to represent really rounded shapes without using hypernerves or subdivision surfaces. Is the same. Okay, bear that in mind. So what I want to do is go back to my edge mode and simply with my loop tool select this tool. So I'll create a boundary, and once again I will fill that selection and simply delete it. Well, now if I go to my edge mode, you see that my loop is still selected. Simply extrude this. Sorry, I will zero extrude this, and I can get a cylindrical extrusion from my box. You can also use that on any other shape. Okay, so for example, you can build a sphere and you can do this kind of extrusion on the sphere. It doesn't matter because a sphere is a curved surface, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, you just have to have enough information, enough geometry to create a hole. So basically this is just an upgrade on when you learn how to make holes. This is just an upgrade skill. Okay, so let me undo that. Now I was just testing if I had any extrusions left. Okay, so let me undo that. But what if you need a spherical shape like this? So for example, something like let me scale this. Something like this. Don't mind this lower part. Okay, let me delete that. Well, to do that you would have to proceed in this manner. You'll once again use that almighty extrude tool, but this time you will manually extrude some value, let's say around 12. So if you don't want to do the manual extrusion again, you can do that. You can simply click here, new transform, and it will basically repeat the next extrusion. So new transform, and once again we can maybe do a new transform. As you can see, this is a mess, but you can always collapse all that to a single point. So you see, and it's all collapsed here. Now you basically have a circular shape, but we'll try to fix it as much as we can. So let's go to our loop tool, and once again we can fill that selection. Okay, and a great tool here under modeling tools is this iron tool, which is shortcut is MG, and we can simply interactively iron this mesh. Okay, let's say a bit more until we get some satisfactory circular shape. You could also use a shortcut on your keyboard V, and you will get this floating menu, and you can use this if you want. It's really useful. So anything that makes you happy and makes your workflow better, and you think that's better for you, then just simply use it. So we should once again select our extrude tool, and we will simply extrude this shape upwards. Let's extrude it a bit, somewhere around 20 perhaps. So here we have to have some additional information before we do the ironing. So increase this subdivision. So let's say maybe, okay, let's stick with the lowest number we can. Now we will simply grow this selection. Okay, For example, now we can utilize our iron tool and simply we can iron it till we get some circular shape, spherical shape, excuse me, like this. Okay? Now bear in mind, in this manner you will not create completely 100% accurate circles and spheres. And really Cinema 4D is not designed for that. So there are basically CAD applications that are designed for extremely precise shapes and so on. So if you are happy with this, if you can live with this, you can see this is not really a part of the sphere. You can, let's say, utilize the brush tool in the smooth mode. I have a really big radius here because I don't want the follow to screw up something. Okay, so you can even play around with this fall of options because basically every one gives different results. Okay, so if you're doing engineerical modeling or very precise modeling, then none of these standard mainstream applications that do 3D are not designed to do that. Okay, you would probably want to use AutoCAD or something like that. Bear that in mind. Okay, and I think we can go to our next example. Okay, in our next example we will tackle one new modeling problem, which is referred to as piping. So I will create basically pipe is a cylinder, so I will create a cylinder and I'll decrease this to something like maybe 12, and you see here there is an orientation option, so I will put it as a Z plus because I want it to look this way. Okay, so to be oriented this way, and I think it is good enough, so I will convert it with my C. And if you middle click your mouse now, you'll get 4 views and you can jump with your middle mouse in between those views. Okay, so I'm in the top view now. I'll just scale this cylinder a bit. Okay, now I've shown you how to extrude cylinders or to make holes rather, but what if you encounter a situation that you have to create let's say another pipe that connects with this pipe? Then you should proceed with this technique. First you should go to edge mode and simply select with your loop tool, okay, UB, or you can go into your modeling layout and simply help yourself by those selections, but I strongly advise you to utilize shortcuts as soon as possible. So now we'll just go here under structure, connect. Okay, so it will basically divide it edges in half right in the middle, which is exactly what I need. Now if I want another pipe to extend this way, I should prepare this geometry for extrusion. So once again, almighty extrude tool will help us create that new pipe. So press the K key and you will enter your knife tool. Currently set to loop. We want the line and be sure to uncheck this visible only, or otherwise we will cut only the upper part of the cylinder. What is underneath, what we can't see, what is not visible will not be cut. Okay, so what we want now is to, that's why exactly we created this middle of, we want from this center point to cut our loop in 45-degree angle, which you can do rather easy when you press down the shift key. Okay, and it will snap to 45 degrees. If you're close to this vector, then it will snap right on that 45-degree radius. Okay, you can even control that with your constrain angle option, so you can snap on any degree you want, but it's rather useful, this 45-degree mode. So shift key and do your cut, and do the same on the other side. You can go to your perspective view to check everything out, and sometimes this happens. If you can't see these green lines, you have to enable this angle lines option under filter menu. Okay, sometimes this knife tool doesn't cut all the way, so always check out, and we can solve this easily by functions, and here is a remove n-gons command, and it will turn those n-gons into real edges. Okay, just a small glitch. Now, since we prepared this area for the extrusion, we can simply select our loop tool with UL, and let us terminate that. Let us terminate that selection, create the outline, and we can now, with our UF, which is fill selection, select this inner polygons we really need. So now it's just a matter of simple. Well, I almost always prefer doing 0 extrusions, so I'm most certain that it will be always good. Okay, and we can zero out these faces on this x-axis, and we will have a pipe. Okay, which leads us to another problem. What if you decide that this geometry is not enough, that you want this result to be more smooth, to be more precise? Well, you will most certainly want to put this object under hypernerves, so Alt key is pressed down and click, and now the cylinder is made as a child of this hypernerves object, which is a generator. And you can see a problem. The problem is there is a really big curve here and a soft transition between pipes, and this is exactly what we don't want to do. We want this to be really sharp and accented, I might say. So let's disable this generator with our Q key, and we can go to our knife tool, but this time in loop mode, and really deselect all, or it will be only cutting this selected faces, since this restrict to selection is enabled. So Control Shift A, and you can now really make a cut really close to this initial extrusion. Okay, so do 1, and if you turn on your hypernerves again, you will see that you made basically a terminator loop or a control loop. Okay, you want to do the same for this side. Okay, so basically the distance between those two edges defines how sharp is the surface. Okay, and the longer the distance, the greater the curve. So basically this technique here is called capping off. Okay, and could also solve these two quads, which we will talk in later lessons, but this is generally the approach to piping. Okay, let's go to our next example. Okay, in this example we have a simple cube, and basically let's say that you want to create a cylindrical extrusion, but not from this flat surface, rather from this angle. Okay, so let me just show you the most simplest way on most little amount of geometry that you can pull it off, so that you can get a feel for the technique. Okay, so let's go to our edge mode here, and with our U and B we will select this ring of polygons and simply connect them, and this one here also, and connect them. We are doing that just to have nice loops of geometry. So basically this area here, we just select it with my live selection. This area here is where we want to create an cylindrical extrusion pointing this way. So it's basically a 45-degree angle. Okay, so there are a couple of ways to do it. Well, the most easy way is to create a, let's say, a cylinder, give it some sample, scale it down a bit, give it, let's say, around 20 segments. Okay, and position it. Let me just, you see why I always enable the integrated shading less, because I can actually see the geometry. Okay, that helps me a lot when positioning objects. Okay, we can convert this cylinder. Okay, so let's say we want to place it somewhere here, and now if I activate my rotate tool, I can rotate, but if I hold down my shift key, I can rotate that in increments. Okay, so this is exactly 45-degree, as you can see. But what if I now go to my move tool? I really cannot move this in this, let's say, a normal direction. This axis has rotated. Okay, so rather than going to axis mode here and zero out that axis, which is certainly a solution, but then you completely lost control of your angle. Okay, so let me undo that. What I really prefer to do is to simply, while your cylinder here or any object that you rotated, even if it was not incrementally rotated, maybe it was just arbitrarily rotated, you can press the Alt G, and that will simply create a new null object, and the cylinder will be made, or any active object will be made a child of it. Okay, why did I do this? Well, because now I can have the best of the both worlds. My cylinder is still properly oriented, the axis is properly oriented, and here under null object, I really want to zero out that null object. Okay, so 0, and now I have a really big degree of freedom. I can move that cylinder any way I want, and even if I need to move it on its, I'll say, natural position, which is not technically correct, but it will give you a good representation. Now I can move it also this way, so it's like a double control. Okay, we just scale it a bit. So basically, most of the users here would simply do the most simplest operation. Okay, and that's an operation called bool. Bool is a sort of special thing inside Cinema for the, we delete this null object. It was just to show you how you can help yourself while moving objects. Okay, so I'll delete this null. Well, bool takes two objects and creates a new geometry from them, but in special way. So let us select both our cylinder and cube and simply subordinate them as a child into bool, and you will immediately see a change. And if you go here under bool, you can see there is a boolean type. That's a mathematical operation. So basically now our A object subtracts the B object, and what we want, we really want to join them. So we will select A union B object. Okay, as you can see, those objects are now joined. They're single geometry. Okay, what we also want to check, just to make sure it's discrete single object. Okay, and We can also check this create Phong breaks at intersections. We will talk about Phong a bit later. Okay? And you now simply want to make also this bool object editable. Okay? Now you basically have a single object. There is a, let me delete this null. You have a single object that is has everything we wanted to have. But the problem with this is this extra geometry, this extra edges, this really messy geometry, which can be really problematic on, let's say, more dense meshes. You can always manually clean that up, but a bool is generally a solution when there is no other solution. Okay, so use bool only if you must do. Okay, let me show you a different technique for that. I will have to completely delete this object and we'll create a new one. Again, you see my segments are here selected already, so I can just press the Control key and simply create few more segments. Well, you can't see that right now because of this isoparms guy. Okay, so just switch to wireframe. You will see the actual amount of geometry. Okay, so let's say 4 segments are enough. Let me convert this cube, so we will hit C, and now we have a fresh start. So we basically want to do practically the same thing, but without bool. Okay. So firstly, I want to select this ring of polygons with my U and B shortcut, since this is our area of interest, and simply connect it, and also this area, this ring of polygons. Okay, and I simply now want to go to my knife tool and let me cut up a most simple shape here. So what I want to do is to deselect all. Okay, so let me start my cutting. Okay, cut this 2 faces. You see, when you're in this single mode, this means you will cut just once. So if I undo that and deactivate this single mode, then I will be able to make consecutive cuts without going out from this cut mode. Okay, now I can deactivate my knife tool by going, for example, to my move tool. So we basically want to create representation of a cylinder here. So to do that, well, firstly I want to create a loop cut here, and I will show you why. Just follow me for a second. I'll go to my loop mode. I want to cut the line really close to this original line. Okay, I don't want to use extrude inner or extrude tool because it will move that new geometry away from this point, away from this edge. It will not be nice and clean. Okay, let me again do that cut. Can be a little problematic. Okay, so now what I want you to do is to select these upper points. Okay, this upper point and this down point. And now if you just scale this, you will see the problem. That's why I didn't use the extrude tool or extrude inner, because I want this geometry to stay on the surface, not to change this surface in any way. Okay, so I want these faces to be flat and also here. So I will undo that. One thing also, well, let me just switch to my modeling layout. You see this tool slide here, it doesn't work on multiple selections at once. Okay, so that's a problem because I want them to slide together. same amount. Okay, so I will use my iron tool here instead, and I will simply iron it a bit, and they will move on that plane. Okay, and I want you to select these far points now, and select these two, and I really want you to scale them, but only in this Z direction, like this. Okay, most of you probably ask, why don't you just iron them? Well, let me undo that. If I'm going to iron those points with my MG shortcut, you will see what happens. They fall into the cube. I don't want that to happen. Okay, let me undo that, and I can simply scale that a bit inward, just to have some sort of a cylindrical shape here. Okay, and let me go to my edge mode. I'll simply select my loop here, just to create a boundary so I can, with my UF, fill that selection that is inside. It also works, for example, outside, but this is what I want to extrude. Okay, now let me activate my extrude tool, and if I start extruding this, you will see we have a problem. That's a big problem. Okay, why does it separate those surfaces? Well, we'll most certainly undo that, and the answer is this angle setting. Currently it's set to 89, and that says cinema 4D, if any faces, if any angle between faces is greater than 89 degrees, I will split them. Okay, so let's try here, for example, 90. You will see what happens. So if you extrude again and undo that, you will see that this setting states any faces that angle that they share 90 degrees, I will split them. So if you go just one angle more, and this is a 90-degree angle, okay, this cinema won't split those faces. Okay, let's check that. And now we can see it doesn't split faces, but we have another problem. It does extrude, but also scales them oddly, which we also don't want. Let me undo that. And that's why I almost always prefer this zero value extrusion. And if I now go to my move tool, I can simply move that wherever I want. And you see this? This can be acceptable sometimes, but what if I want to position it precisely? So let me undo that. What if I want to move it along this vector exactly in between those two, so in this 45-degree angle? Well, I would have to change the orientation of this axis. So I will have to right click on my axis, and without explaining all these settings, I will choose a normal. So it basically will select a middle vector between normals. Okay, we will talk about normals. So now you will be able to pull that out in, let's say, a desired direction. Now, there is one funny thing in Cinema 4D. There is no flatten polygons command, which is ridiculously left out for I don't know which reason, and this could be problematic for users. What you can do now is scale this, sort of eyeball it when you feel it's good, but you will never be sure that that is the correct setting. Okay, let me undo that. So what I prefer to do is, let me just jump with my middle mouse button to 4 views and jump in my front view. Let me enable this garage shading lines here also. Since we can't flat this out, but we know that these 2 points lie on the same plane, so I basically want to cut them with my knife tool in line mode. And I want to cut the whole way through geometry. So I want to disable this visible only and simply cut that. Okay. And let me go back to my perspective view. Now I can simply say with my loop tool, select this loop and simply once again UF fill that selection. And I can manually patch this upper part. Okay. Now what I want you to show again, if I drop this under subdivision surface or this hypernode, which are exactly the same thing, my Alt key, you will see here, let's go to isoperms mode. You will see that there is a sort of a soft transition here, which is really what I don't want to do. I want it to be rather, let's say, sharp. So I have to put in a control loop, just pressing my Q key back and forth, which enables and disables generators. I want to squeeze a loop cut right in between those two loops. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now, and let me do a cut right here in my right in between those two with my knife. And look now, if I press the generator, what happens? You see that connection is much more defined. Okay. You could play around a bit with points to squeeze that to a cylinder look, but again, a word of caution. If you absolutely must have a precise cylinders and spheres, you will be forced to use bool almost always. If you are modeling for designing or for fun shapes, or if your models don't have to be engineerically correct, you can go on with these techniques. Okay, I hope I didn't lose some of you, and let's go to our next example. Okay, in this example we will tackle what is by my humble opinion the most complex modeling task you will ever encounter. Okay, so basically let's say you have two objects that are positioned and rotated and distributed somewhere freely in the scene. So for example, look at the mess in the rotations, and here also it's positioned freely. So the biggest problem in modeling is how, at least from my point of view, is how to cut out this cone object with this shape, so we can later, for example, extrude that shape, or simply to connect them and to preserve this nice clean surface and topology we will of course also discuss. Many of you would go for the simplest solution. Most simplest solution is, let's keep it this way. And if I do a preview render in my viewport with Alt and R key, well, somebody will say, oh, that's quite nice. Why even change something? But what if I want, if I later decide to subdivide these objects, how will I subdivide them? Even if I put them in a group with my Alt G and put a hypernerbs, I'll see I have a problem. We can clearly see those are not connected objects, and that's also a problem. So if you are sure that you will not be putting your objects under some sort of a subdivision, then you can cheat this way. Another way of connecting these two surfaces would be simply, let's say let's put them under the bool. which is also a solution. Okay, let's for example create this single object. Okay, let's say union. Okay, so this looks okay. Even if I render it, okay, it's rather okay. But what if I put that under hypernerves? Watch this. There are problems here, big time, as you can see. So let me undo that. Even those two objects are connected physically. Let's for example try a subtract operation. So basically that's exactly what we want. We want this arbitrary object to cut this cone object. So we have this shape which we can later work on. Well, we can certainly convert this bool right now and simply do some manual manipulation and so on. The problem is put this under hypernerves. Excuse me. Well, if I render this, you will see problems here. Here, those are artifacts we discussed, and that's because we have. Let me delete this bool and hypernerves. That's because we have so many triangles, and we can try to manually clean up. But the problem is that these newly formed points are off the curvature of the surface. I really hope that you understand what I mean. My English is not that gonna. You see, here the surface is a bit indented into this area, so it's not smooth, and that is a really big problem because we want to keep the smoothness and the curvature and all characteristics of this cone, but we really need this shape. Okay, so let me undo a few steps until I get let me just pull them out from my bool object. Let me delete that bool object, we will no longer need it. Hopefully there is a good enough solution, because I just only want to use Cinema for these standard tools. I don't want to use plugins, and especially not commercial plugins. There are few absolutely beautiful free plugins that you can use and simplify things like that. I will not mention them. You can go to c4dcafe.com and fire away with questions, and there will be many people willing to help you and answer. Okay, so once again I will blatantly use this opportunity to speak about forums. So c4dcafe.com, it's run by Kiwi, and hope you'll enjoy your stay there. Okay, back to our modeling problem. So our problem would be solved if we can somehow cut this shape into our cone, but to preserve all surface characteristics of that cone. Well, for some odd, unbelievable reason, you just can't project points on the polygon meshes, but you can project points on splines. So although we will talk about splines a bit later, there is a beautiful functionality in Cinema 4D, and we will use it and abuse it. And we'll go here under structure menu, under edit spline, and hit this edge to spline guy. Okay, so basically now we have this edge, this loop on our polygon converted to a spline. You can see it here. Let me just pull it out. so it's free and it's not a child. Just hide this arbitrary object, or even let's delete it. We really don't need. We just need this shape. Okay. So now if I pull my newly created spline to the surface, there is another problem. See, I want these points to snap to the surface. Okay, so I want, if I go to point mode, I want this point to snap to the first surface that it encounters. Okay, so it basically sticks to this cone. I could, for example, press my P key and tear off this menu, so I will have my snapping enabled. Although it can be used on this smaller amount of geometry, and let's say I want to activate my point snapping, you'll see a problem. Okay. Let's say if I enable also polygon snapping, so I want this point to snap into a polygon, you'll see the next problem. When it finds a polygon, it won't stay on that same direction. It will also lose its shape. So let me undo that. There is a nice little feature. So go into our side view. In this case, this is the right view, and select your spline. And just go here under structure, edit spline, and you want to project this spline. So we want to project it on the surface, and we want to use this current view as our projection view. So here under mode view, just leave it as a view. You see there are much options here. So just hit apply, and if you go back to your perspective view, you will see that some sort of a magic happened. Let me just pull it a bit so we'll see. It snapped to the surface of the cone, and that is exactly what we need. Okay, so let me go here under my right view. What we want to do now, since you have a visual guide, the exact visual guide you want on this cone, you want to move points to create this hollow shape. Okay, so instead of really doing this manual work, we just, for example, select a loop mode for cutting in my knife tool, and we'll certainly somewhere need more geometry. Okay, for example, here, let me select my here, you will need a cut so you can define that shape. Okay, let me just do one cut here, and let me do, you always want to do a positional cut in between the boundary of your visual guide and the first loop on the actual geometry. Okay, so in between them on the other side, this will be this area right here. So I want to do another cut right here. Okay, so instead of, let me go to my perspective view. If I select a single point here and just move it, for example, in my, I just right clicked on this axis, and there are many options here. If I select object, for example, nothing heavy. If I select normal, I will get proper positioning, a proper orientation. Okay, sometimes this won't work. Okay, we go back to my right view, and the best, always the best, is to use the slide tool, so MO. So you will always slide on these edges, so you won't disturb the curvature and the shape. Okay, so what you want to do here is to slide those points the most accurately as you can and add knife cuts. Okay, so you really get close to that shape. For example, something like this. I often find that it's quite useful to select the spline and give it some really powerful color. See here under basic tab under spline, you can stay use color, and I always use a color. Example, let's say a red. It's a really powerful color that you will always see. So now that visual guide is much more vivid. Okay, so let's again slide those points. Now, once you get that shape, I really don't want to waste time for this manual vertex pushing. You will simply delete these faces inside. Okay, and let me just slide this point here. And then after you have manually created that hole, that arbitrary hole, that cutout, you can freely extrude the shape. And what is best, it won't have artifacts. Okay, and we will, for example, if you create a few triangles, you will see techniques in next lessons how to solve triangles. Okay, so this is, I think, the most normal way to create this kind of geometry, to solve these shapes. Of course, there are plugins, and naturally Maxon can also construct new tools, but for the current time, that's all we have in the arsenal. We have to use the tools that we have. Okay, so let's go to our next lesson. Okay, in this example I want to just really expand a bit on that precise positioning we were talking about, because I didn't want to scare you off that early. And we will talk about some posing. Okay, here we have two cubes, but they are actually a single geometry, which you can see by going to component mode. And I really want to show you how you can precisely position those objects, even if they are belonging to the same geometry. Okay, there is a nice tool in C now4D. Here under functions menu, it's called measure and construction. Okay, so let's activate it. Now, let me just hide these cubes for a moment. You see, we got a new guy right here. I'll also hide this world axis so it doesn't bother us. See, this is our new default measure and construction. Okay, so let's unhide this. Now you can manipulate that measure, which has some sort of a snapping feature. While you press your control key down, and you can drag it and it will snap to points and polygons. Okay, also on the other handle, let's say we want to measure this distance, and distance is displayed here. Okay, so what if I play a bit with that setting? See, nothing happens. It just transfers that object in a single direction, in the direction of which this line constitutes, this x direction. Okay, so what I really want to do, for example, is, let's say I want to position this cube here to all the way here, just exactly to touch this other cube. Okay, for that I have to select, I have to fill the selection of that cube. Okay, so this cube must be selected, all polygons of that cube must be selected. Now let me go again to my measure and construction guy and simply watch what happens if I now manipulate this value. You see, and if I enter 0 here and press enter, and this cube lie exactly next to each other. Okay, there is no space between them, they are exactly touching each other. Okay, so use this measure and construction tool, use it and abuse it. Okay, so let's say another problem with you, let's say that I want, let me press my E key to activate my move tool. Let's say I want this cube to lie directly on the top of this first cube, but really to touch themselves on these edges. Okay, so firstly I would have to manipulate it measure and construction. So let me activate again measure and construction, and simply my control key I want to snap this measure to where it should be. So I want to measure in between these edges. Currently it says 45 dot blah 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 something, but if you enter 0 here, you will zero out that measure. Okay, and see if this arrow shows in the opposite direction, it will double the initial amount, so beware of that. Okay, so you have a little checkbox here that says reverse, and you will see this guy will show in another direction. And now if I enter 0, it will snap right on the edge. Okay, you can also always create a third point, and you can measure angles in between objects and so on and so forth, but I really don't want to bother you with this. You see the angle, this angle is 71 point something degrees. Okay, this can be really useful. Let me delete this measure, we don't need it no more. Okay, just zooming out a bit. Let's say that you want to, for example, move your object, but for some exact amount. So as we saw previously, if you hold down your shift key, you can move objects in increments. Okay, so for example, you could move by increments of 10, and you can really set that increment value here under snap settings, under your move tool, and simply change. But let's say you have to move your object by some really custom number like 78 or something like that. Well, simply you can do basic mathematics operations here. So if I want to move my object 78 units in this direction, which is x, I can say, because this value is changing, I can simply add here. So I will add plus 78 and hit enter, and my object will move exactly that number, exactly 78 units in that direction. Okay, it's really helpful, and you can do all sorts of operations here, like divide, multiply, and so on and so forth. So for example, if you want to really cut this distance in half, you will simply divide it by 2. Okay, so there is a lot of manual work done for you, which is really nice. Okay, I also want to show something else, and for that purpose I will delete these cubes, they're kind of in the way, and I will just enable this guy. See, here is some basic hand model. Just switching off my generator. For example, sometimes when you are modeling, you really don't want to rig your model with joints and create really an animated rig. You really want to pose your model while you are modeling. For that purpose, there is a also nice little trick. So let's say that you want, I already had this edge selected, you can simply select it with your loop tool. Let's say I want to fill this selection, and you're currently seeing that my move tool, my axis, is in the center. So any operation I do right now will origin from that axis, from that center, which I really don't want. So here under modeling axis I can move my modeling axis anywhere I want. So for example, I want to move it in -x direction. And how do I know that? Well, simply because these guys, this red guy is the X guy, this blue guy is the Z guy, and this green guy is the Y guy. If you're really not certain, you can always enable this filter world axis and it will tell you which guy is the which guy. So how do I know it's in minus? Well, simply in the direction where the arrow is showing is plus value and the opposite way is minus. So if I move it on my X in minus, I will go left. Okay, so now if I activate my rotate tool, I can simply create some simple basic posing for my hand. Okay, this is really helpful. I should also mention that you can test your deformations, because you will want to model your models to be suitable for animation, and that requires somewhat different distribution and the way of these loops will look like, because this hand was not intended to be to be animated, but it can be adjusted with a few little modifications. Okay, so for example, basically when you're animating, you will have to account for this. So here, if I disable my hypernerves, you want to have some space in between loops. Let me hide my axis. So you want to have space here in between loops. So once that joint or the deformation happens all the way naturally it can, you don't have overlapping edges and points. On the other hand, where a little deformation will happen, you can really tighten up those loops. So you'll basically want to, in this example, you will want to slide these edges a bit. Okay, so they are a bit wider on the bottom and a bit tighter at the top. Okay, this is somewhat beyond the grasp of this lesson, but I thought it would be nice to mention it. Okay, so let's go to our next example. Okay, so in this example I would like to demonstrate how can you address the problem when you get a high density mesh to work with. Okay, so basically you will most certainly run into a situation when a client provides you with a high density mesh, or from other application, or any situation that you can think of, that you will get this really high polygon count mesh. And there are many ways to tackle this, and I will show you a few. Okay, the first and the most used option by, let's say, beginners is this little guy here under objects deformation, and it's called polygon reduction. Okay, so we will put it as a child of our landscape, and now as you can see you get a reduced number of polygons, but look at the topology. We discussed it. It's really bad. There are lots of triangles, and no matter how you fiddle around with settings, you will never get good result. Okay, let me delete that deformer. The other solution is, well, many would simply go in the and select their loop tool. You see, this is a good time to explain something about the loop tool. Loop tool works all the way around, in the lack of the better term. So there is another similar tool in Cinema 4D. So if you press U-M, you will get a path selection tool. Okay, we talked about those selection tools, but there is a nice mode in path selection tool that is called simple edge loop. Now it will not go all the way, it will just end as a straight line. So one would think, well, why wouldn't I simply select this few of these edge loops and simply manually dissolve them and try to get a more simplified mesh. Okay, that certainly is a solution, but it would be extremely time consuming. And let's say that your client wants, for example, a road around this mountain, and he wants some sort of a better mesh, because you really can't build a road on this mesh. This mesh is really high poly and it would take a really long time for you to do that. Well, the another way to do it is to simply enable snapping here. We'll tear off this menu and we will activate some snapping features like point snapping and polygon snapping, and we will simply build manually our geometry with snapping tools. Okay, and that also is really time consuming. Well, since Cinema 4D does not have retopology tools, you have to resort to tricks. So in this specific situation, and almost every situation where you have to minimize the amount of geometry is individual, I really can't cover them all. Okay, so for example, if you have a character that has too many loops, you can, well, rather simply simplify that geometry with dissolving those loops, but here you have to preserve this, at least a basic form of that. So one trick here is to use cloth, and cloth is a dynamic system for simulating, well, cloth, but we can use it and abuse it in other purposes, as everything inside in Cinema 4D, to get the results we need for. Okay, so always try to think out of the box. Well, firstly we will need, let's say, a plane with decent amount of subdivision. Okay, for example, let me think this 20 segments will be enough. Okay, let me convert that, and I will just rather scale this plane just to somewhat visually match that landscape we have. Okay, so now what do I want to do? I want to add a tag, a behavior to this plane. So I want to select my plane object, and here under tags, here is a cloth-tiled tag, and select cloth. Okay, so you see there are no playback controls in this modeling layout, simply because people from Axon thought, well, you don't need playback controls while you are modeling something, right? To get them, you can go to any other layout that has it. For example, standard layout has those controls. And now watch what happens if I press play. My object falls down and it behaves. If I click on this tag, it behaves accordingly to these settings here, and there are many settings here. So for example, under forces you can see a gravity value that's minus 9.81 in always in minus y direction. Okay, so just not to complicate things, we want actually for this plane that is now really a cloth object, to collide with this landscape object. So we have to attach that behavior to our landscape. Okay. So we'll select our landscape and go again under tags, again under cloth-tiled. I have a few tags that you won't find here that are basically plugins, this guy and this guy. So under cloth-tiled, select a collider, and that basically means I will be colliding any object that is cloth object. Okay, there are some settings, but you can leave them at default. So now, if I press play, you can see actually that my cloth object collided with that surface. Okay, so here I'm not getting really good results, and that is because my cloth is too stiff. So to go back to my cloth tag, just reduce this stiffness value to something around maybe 9. Okay, it's just a matter of experimentation with settings. Okay, so let me go back to the beginning of my simulation and try again. And now I get somewhat better results. Okay, I'm not trying to build a perfect example here, I'm just trying to show you the techniques. So once you fiddled around with settings and you are satisfied with settings and you want to keep this shape, well, one way would be to go here under the Raster tab and utilize this set initial state button. But really what I prefer to do is to create a new object. Why? Well, simply to have a backup if anything goes wrong and you want to try again. This way you create a non-destructive workflow if anything goes bad. Okay. So now what I want to do is go here under objects and say current state to object. And I want to delete both these tags. Okay. And now I have two planes. But if I go all the way back to my simulation, I will have two objects that are completely the same. If I haven't deleted one of these cloth tags, I would have my plane in initial state, but that's quite alright. That's a happy accident. Okay, so yeah, you are asking yourself what now? Well, now simply you will go to your point mode, and with the brush tool you have some nice options here. If you set your mode to surface, let me just increase the strength, let's say 100%, really to show you the effect. If I now press and hold my left mouse button, I will be pulling the points in the direction of the surface. Okay, but also if I hold down my control key, I will reverse the effect. Okay, so now I will basically push them to a surface. Okay, so let me undo that. And you see this radius, this little circular preview that shows where the tool will be active. Well, if you press your left mouse button down, you can scroll your mouse wheel to adjust that radius. Okay, so you don't have to go back and forth from the viewport here. Okay, so you can really push those points manually where you want them to get that shape as close as you can. You can also utilize this normal mode. So try with the both modes and see what gives you the best result. This is without control key. Okay, you can do that, and this is with control key, which really reverses the effect. Okay, so you want to create a low polygon version of your high polygon mesh so you can work with it more efficiently. So for example, this part here, I really want to simply just use a smaller radius for that. I want to push them a bit inwards. Okay. We're really trying to get the shape as best as possible. See, my strength is here 100%, that's why effect is so strong. But hopefully you get the idea. You can also smooth out in the smooth mode. Okay. So use every tool you have under the brush tool to really represent that surface in the best way. You can now add some detail, but if you need to build some road, do that first, and later, only in the finishing stages, add more geometry to really represent that shape. Okay? Hopefully this will help you a lot in your modeling process, and always clean up after you've done some operation. For example, this collider tag is not longer really needed, so delete it. So Sina4D will always be quick and responsive. Okay, so let's go to our next lesson. In this example, we will talk a bit about normals. Well, what are normals? Well, as a side, as they are opposite to insanes, which is just kidding. Well, normals are, I will show you rather than explaining technically what normals are. So for example, you see I created a simple geometry here, and let's say in later stages you will most certainly want to apply a material to your object, so let's apply it. We get a new tag which says this cube has this green material, and we can see a preview of that material in viewport. So to actually create an image from that material and settings we gave to this scene, we will simply have to render it, and I will utilize a preview render. Okay, so press the Alt key and the R, and I will get a preview of this object rendered in my viewport. You see this little slider here? It's a quality slider. It basically means if it's on the top, it means give me the best quality for the preview. So it all looks fine. Why did I even do this? Well, you see here, change the side to which the projection is applied, and I say just front, then you will see an instant change. So what the hell happened? We expect all this material to be applied to all this geometry. Well, that's not the case. So if we go to our faces mode and just select our material, I will again press Alt and R to get rid of this render view. And if you select any face, you will see it basically takes a orangey color, and on the other side you will see it takes some sort of a bluish color. Why is that? Well, if I go here under Edit menu, under Viewport, and do a configure, I'll just turn on this tinted poly normals. Okay? Some of you that are trying this out probably wonder where the hell is my axis, those bands with arrows. Well, I press the Alt D to hide it, and I will do that again. So Alt D, just to show you without any obstacles. You see this little line here? That's a normal. A normal says and stays. Wherever the normal points, the material will be applied. Okay? Other side, where the normal does not point, the material won't be applied. Okay? It can sound a bit technical, but Cinema is smart enough to know that you want to probably by default project to both sides. So if for some reason you have problems, artifacts, or parts of your material are missing from the render, it's a good chance that these normals are to be guilty. Okay, so where this small line points, that's the right direction. Well, that's not technically correct, but it will really give you a good understanding of it. So let's say that you want to flip your normals, then you will simply select for example, this face. And what if you want the normal to point this way? You will simply go here under functions and do a reverse normals command. Okay? If for some reason, let me undo that. If for some reasons you have randomly selected some faces and did a reverse normals command, and sometimes those kind of things happen while you model. The normals are not positioned, oriented the way you want, and if you are importing some free models from another application, there is a good chance that you will have problems with normals. Okay, so let's say you want to orient the normals in a single go. So let's, for example, select all faces with Ctrl A, and if we do a functions align normals, then Cinema will try to guess where do we want them to be oriented. So if for some reason Cinema calculates the complete opposite, then you can simply select all faces and do a reverse normals command. Okay, so now we'll see if I render my object and do only the front projection, then the material will be actually applied in the inside, you see, where the normals show. Okay, so I'm pressing Alt R to get rid of this render preview. So be aware of these normals. You can turn them on visibly in editor, here under edit configure, and this tinted poly normals. Okay, you don't actually have to see the lines, you can use the colorization. So if I, let's say, delete this material, then the orange means the right way and the blue means the wrong way. Okay, which is not really correct, but you will much easier understand this. Okay, and maybe this is a good time to talk about this tag here. Probably most of you wondered what is this tag and this one too. Well, this stores UVW coordinates, which we will talk about a bit later, and this is a Phong tag. Okay, so let's create a new object for that purpose. Let's, for example, create a simple sphere. I have isoparams mode enabled. I will just go to wireframe to see the actual amount of geometry. Let me convert that sphere with my C button. Let's do a render preview of that sphere. And you can see that sphere is somewhat, let's say, blocky on the edges. See? That's simply because we don't have enough geometry to state we want to smooth all this out. Okay? But what here if under Phong tag, let's say, turn off this angle limit? Nothing, at least visibly, happens. But what if I delete the tag completely? Watch what happens. Now every transition from any face to other or edge to another edge is blocky. So the Phong tag, which can be found here under Cinema 4D tags, and all the way somewhere in the middle, Fong tag, okay, basically says, and it's designed to tell the surface how will it be presented once you render it, because otherwise you will need much more information of how your object will look. Okay, so if you want to create a really detailed sphere, you can subdivide it. Even with hypernerves you will still get blocky shapes. So let me undo that. So Fong tag says how the surface will be presented. And here, for example, there is an edge break option. So let me put that under hypernerves. Okay, now we have a rather clean, smooth shape. You see here, we were talking about poles. Here they are. So let's, here under Fong tag, experiment a bit with this Fong angle. So what if this is all the way to 180? What happens then? Well, we can't really see the result. What if it is 0? If it is 0, we have an effect as the Fong angle does not exist. So experiment a bit and get the feel for that feature inside Cinema 4D. And I believe that any other explanation other than this one that I'm giving to you right now would be a little too technical, a little too hard for you to understand, especially if you are a beginner. So let's say you are now having your Fong angle limit just right, and for some reason don't want to add more geometry. Let me just press Alt and R to get rid of that window. Let's go back to isoparms mode. Let's say you want a hard edge. So for example, this loop of edges here, you really want it to be hard. So you want to see a transition between those faces. You will simply set that edge to be a broken Fong edge or a creased edge. Okay, so you will go functions and you will say break Fong shading. Okay, so now if I do a preview render, you will see here that you can actually see. Let me change a bit here under display, the default light. You'll actually see a stop in that geometry. So you basically told this edge to be 0 Fong angle value regardless of the setting here. So let me hide this and turn off this. And if you, for some reason you model and you simply forget which of the loops you broke, which of the edges you have set it to be creased edges, to be hard edges, you can go here under functions and do a select broken Fong edge, and it will select all edges you have creased. Alternatively, if you want to completely get rid of those edges, it will be unbreak Fong shading command. Okay, I really hope I didn't lose anyone here. This feature is not so really much important, but I think once you get deep into a shading and into exporting to other 3D packages, it is really crucial for you to understand Fong shading. In our next lesson, we will talk about solving geometry problems some more, but this time specifically solving triangles and angles to quads, which is really good tutorial, and it will help you a lot to get rid of those triangles and really point you how to manipulate your geometry and create a nice and clean topology. Okay, see you in the next lesson.